All right, so we're live now. Yes, all right. Cheers and huzzah. And yes, this guy is back. Henry VIII. I had him, this mug with a golden latte, of course, because only the golden latte for Henry. But yes, but this guy is back, and for good reason. I had this mug last week when I had April Thomas on from Fashions Revisited, and we talked all kinds of things, but we did talk a lot of the Tudors. We talked a lot of Henry VIII and who our favorite portrayal of Elizabeth I was and everything. So, so Henry's back, and for good reason, because this week I am going to be discussing even more on the Tudors and even a little bit pre-Tudor era, which was the Plantagenets. And let me tell you, they are a very, very, very fascinating, that's a very fascinating bloodline. I have this big old stack of books here. Cool, so I see a couple people are joining, yay. All right, so I have a big old stack of books here, and that is because I'm going to be just kind of talking a little bit of just some of the influences that, just the influence that the Tudors are having on my forthcoming music project, my forthcoming album that I am in the process of writing. And I can't wait to share with you just some of the demos and stuff that, like, even if it's just little snippets, you know, I really, really like how the songs are coming. Especially the song that I'm writing about Anne Boleyn. And yes, I wanted to have an Anne Boleyn costume actually for this episode, but it ended up not happening. But at some point in the future, I will be dressed as Anne Boleyn. But this thing. I figured it looked kind of, you know, I don't know, but okay, so, but yes, but before I get into all of that, I'm actually I always show my, my tavern setup, and you can always see it a little bit better, than, you can if, say, you know, like when I have a guest, because when I have a guest on, you can only see probably from here up. But since I have my, and since it's just me, you can see my setup a little bit better. But I'm going to show you, because I did get a couple new candles that I'm really, really excited about. So this is, of course, I had to have my Tudor House library candle, because, of course, this, I'm talking about like the Tudors and the Plantagenets tonight. So I love this candle. This is one of my favorites. It's Mythology Candles, of course. I'm just a little bit obsessed with that candle company. Like I said, they're non-toxic. They make all of their stuff out of, their candles from coconut wax. It's a really, really good candle company. So if you like non-toxic candles, if you're into all that like I am, and plus if you're into things like fantasy, role play, live action role play, things like that, I would definitely, and even just history inspired things, I would definitely check them out. So, and I got these new candles. It's actually by, I mentioned this before, Mythology Candles was first created by another Celtic artist. She's a Celtic metal to be exact, Leah McHenry, and her music is amazing. I like it too. But I think it was the winter of 2019, she came out with a Christmas album that, hey guys, all right, thank you for joining. She came out with a Christmas album that called An Ancient Winter, and it's a very good album. And with the Ancient Winter album, she also came out with a small collection of candles, and this was kind of the almost prelude to what would later on become Mythology Candles, because these candles apparently were such a hit that that she just actually, it kind of like later on, she just evolved it into mythology, what later became Mythology candles. And this is from her Ancient Winter collection. And I actually did not get these when they first came out. I did, however, they are on sale right now. I do think they still have some left in Leah's shop. So, but yeah, so if, you want to swing by and get some, you can. They're actually at a discounted price, so now's a good time to do it. This is, there's 3 different candles that came with the set. This one, it's Frostberry, okay? And yes, this collection is called Ancient Winter, but, oh well, I mean, it's spring, but that's okay. We can still burn them anyway and enjoy them. And then we have here, we have Warrior's Hearth. Okay, that's real. I think that's, I love just that name alone. I think that's really cool. And then also, I don't want to catch my sleeve on fire. That would not be good. Oh, I have a funny story once I'm done getting this. I might have to get up and kind of reach around my books here, so that's all right. Okay, and then we have Northern Woods, okay? And these are the 3 candles that come with this collection. So basically the description, Winterberry, so it says this candle scent is not your typical Christmas scent, because this was released in Christmas of 2019. Christmas scent. It was inspired by scenes of frost-covered trees, frozen lakes, delectable berries. Top notes include cranberry, apple, cinnamon, and subtle pepper, and a subtle peppermint finish. A perfect combination to embrace the winter season, and your guests will be sure to love it. And then Northern Woodlands. This candle perfectly aligns with Leah's Ancient Winter album, embracing the sense of a whimsical evergreen forest, snow-covered, trampled foliage, comforts of pipe tobacco, and sweet hint of caramel. No winter season would be complete without setting a mood like this. The scent is one of a kind and could even pass as a multi-seasonal favorite, which I agree, because I do really like this one. But my favorite is Warrior's Hearth. Just the name alone, I love it. So Warrior's Hearth has a special fragrance that is sure to warm your heart and home, a subtle scent of leather and weapons, which I love that, leather and weapons, a smoky hearth, charcoal and vanilla make this candle an absolute must-have for your winter season. And yes, so that's the Ancient Winter candle collection. I do believe, like I said, they are at a discounted price now, so if that interests you, I'll leave the link in the description in the replay of this episode. So, all right, so that is my tavern setup for tonight. That and this big old stack of books, and like I said, Henry's back. So, funny story. Speaking of, kind of sort of setting things on fire. I didn't set anything on fire, but last episode, I had on April C. Thomas of Fashions Revisited, and and of course I had a little bit more candles burning than normal. So we go through the episode, everything is fine, but and later on I still have the candles burning. I kind of spread them out and everything throughout the throughout my apartment and everything, but I have the most sensitive smoke detector, which I guess in a way is good, but it can also get kind of annoying sometimes, especially it's like if I'm just trying to cook or something and it's like the oven's not even that hot and the smoke detector just like decides it wants to go off. It's kind of annoying, but like I said, I guess in a way it's kind of good. So I'm just kind of like, after the episode, I'm just kind of settling in. I'm still burning the candles. I'm getting some work done and all that. And all of a sudden I hear this really annoying loud beeping, and it's like, oh gosh, like, and it's like midnight, you know, and my smoke detector's going off at midnight of all times, and I'm just like, and I'm like running to the door of the room that it's in, and I just shut the door, and then it shuts off immediately after, thankfully, you know, I'll like wake the neighbors or something after I shut the door, you know, and so then it stops. But then, and it was weird because like all the wicks were trimmed. It's like, and the flames weren't even burning that high. But like I said, it's like I have the most sensitive smoke detector. So like, you know, thankfully it didn't happen during the live stream though. So now it's like I'm just so paranoid that it'll happen during a live stream that, although that might be funny if it did, but now I shut that door, then I burn these, do my tavern setup and everything. So just because I'm so paranoid about that right now, but that's my tavern setup. And just a couple of announcements right now. I am really excited about what's going on the Tavern live stream in the coming weeks. So in the coming weeks, I have on May 7th, I have Eliza Vince of her blog is Silk and Sass 1776. She is awesome. I am so excited to be having her on. Her and her husband, they're musicians as well. And also, like, she's into all of the things that, you know, that I'm in, and I'm into, you know, as far as like living history goes, and like costuming, music, and all that stuff. So she and I have a lot in common. Also, we're very much into busting historical myths, which April and I did a little bit of that last episode, last week actually. And so I'm really excited to have Eliza on, and she had a really cool idea. We're going to be discussing how music of ancient Greece influences the music of today. So I'm, you know, of course, I'm always excited to discuss music, and of course, she and her husband Eric will also be they might entertain us with a little bit of music, because they're musicians, they're a musical act, and I've seen some video clips of their performances, especially at living history sites. And I'm really excited about having them on, and I'm really excited to be talking to Eliza, kind of, I guess, as much in person as she and I can talk right now. And I'm really excited about that. I'm looking forward to it. And Eliza has, we've done a couple of blog post swaps before on my Bonfires, Castles, and Time Travel webzine. I have interviewed her for my blog too, as well. So I mean, we've, you know, collaborated before, but I'm really excited to be collaborating with her like this too, and I'm excited to have her and her husband perform as well. Like that'll just be awesome. It'll be another musical guest, because when I had Fair May on and they performed some songs of theirs, and it was, you know, it worked really well and it was very enjoyable. So I'm looking forward to this. Yay. And then on May 20th or no, it's the 21st. That'll be the other live stream episode. And I'll be actually, my friend Chuck Alston will actually be appearing on the show on May 27th, not May 27th, what am I talking about? May 21st. And so, yeah, we're just going to be talking music and history, and Chuck's appeared on my living room sessions, my music living room sessions. So I'm definitely obviously excited to have him on. That's also going to be my first in-house, I guess you can say, episode, and meaning that instead of like, you know, us like, you know, talking to each other virtually, Chuck's actually going to be like my first like kind of in-house, you know, kind of like, you know, where they actually come onto the set, so to speak, and you know, kind of talk that way. So I'm excited about doing that too. So so that'll, like I said, be my first in-house episode, and I hope to be doing more of those as well. So All right, so that's a little bit of what's to come. So now on to the Tudors and the Plantagenets. So yes, because we will be discussing a little bit of the Plantagenets. I'm really excited. So so how I became interested in the Tudors and Henry VIII and, you know, just all, you know, his wives and, you know, just his whole history. It actually started, I was very, very young. I was maybe only like 10 years old when I first heard about Henry VIII. It was actually, I loved to go to the library a lot when I was a kid, and I don't know, I was just kind of paging through a book, and I came across the image of Henry VIII, and it's the painting that it's probably the most famous painting of him that was painted, I'd say within the decade leading up to his death, and you know, so I'm just kind of looking, and I'm just like reading a little bit about him, and you know that he was the father of Queen Elizabeth I, and of course there was also a picture of Elizabeth I there, and and then what really struck me, my 10-year-old mind, was when I also read about how Elizabeth I's mother, how Henry had Elizabeth I's mother, Anne Boleyn, executed by, you know, beheading, basically. I was like, oh, okay, you know, because I'm like 10 years old. I'm reading about that. I'm like, okay, wow, all right, you know, and then it's like, and from that point on, though, like, I was just really, really just kind of interested in just learning more about, you know, just about all that. And then, you know, later on I found out that he had 6 wives and everything, and you know, and only, you know, Catherine Parr, she was the one that survived him, because he died while they were still married. And that's Catherine Parr is also a very fascinating story too. So, you know, so that kind of, you know, piqued my interest, and I kind of like, off and on, you know, through the years then, off and on just kind of like would come across like little interesting, you know, kind of facts about them, and I'd learn a little bit more. And then when and then especially when I got more into things like, you know, when I was in high school, I got more into like, you know, theater and of course music. I was into the Celtic music. I was also into like rock and like metal and kind of more gothic music as well. So, you know, so that also kind of fueled my interest there. And, you know, and also I first heard the song, I think I was around like maybe like 9 or 10 or something. I first heard the song Green Sleeves, and it was only an instrumental. I didn't actually hear the lyrics to the song until much later. But I heard but it was an instrumental, and it was like a flute solo backed by like an orchestral, you know, like by an orchestra. And it was actually, and that was another thing, that song that was another thing that like kind of like just kind of took a 10-year-old me, just like I was just kind of taken by that song. And like I didn't know what it was. I just thought it was a pretty song. And then I was, you know, and then I, you know, a little bit later I looked it up, and I, you know, found it was Green Sleeves. And then at that time I was also, when, you know, like a little bit, you know, like years later, I was like getting into like Lorena McKennett's music and all that stuff, and you know Enya, Lorena McKennett, all that, and Lorena McKennett did a version of Green Sleeves, and then I was also hearing other people's versions of it too, and then you know, I was like hearing the lyrics, and then it was at some point then I also like read about the legend behind the song, which goes like when Henry VIII was trying to divorce Catherine, get his marriage divorced, annulled, whatever, from Catherine of Aragon, and he was like going through all this like this debacle with the Pope and the Catholic Church, and then he was also trying to convince Anne Boleyn to to be with him. He was like trying to court her, and there's a legend behind that song that he wrote that for Anne Boleyn. Now the actual musical arrangement of the song, some music historians said that the actual arrangement didn't really come along until after Henry's death. However, it's said that he probably wrote the poem, or at least a version of that poem for Anne Boleyn, because there are still letters and things that Henry wrote to Anne when she left his court and actually went back home. And some historians say just because like she just kind of didn't want like any part in that, at least not at first. But she actually left his court and went back home, and he was actually quite distraught over that. So he was writing her all these letters, and it's not really known whether she responded to him or not. And there are, and so like, some people who are really very much into Tudor history, from, Susanna Lipscomb to, other really great historians who I recently got into, Claire Ridgway and her work and everything. Actually I have some of her books here, but she, it's actually, unfortunately, Anne's side of the conversation no longer exist to us, at least that we know of. Who knows? Maybe there's a letter from Anne to Henry hidden in a trunk somewhere, and it just hasn't been, it hasn't seen the light of day yet. Wouldn't that be cool if like that was kind of unearthed? And speaking of unearthed, I'm going to be talking about a king who was unearthed, a little bit later. But I think that would be so cool if we actually if maybe somebody would at some point maybe find a letter that was maybe from Anne to Henry. I think that would be so cool. But that might be kind of, I don't know, because after Anne was executed, Henry pretty much had all memory of her removed, because he was then moving on to like Jane Seymour. However, there were some little things that were missed. One of them being, I forget where exactly in his court it was, but to this day there still exists the Anne and Henry symbol that Henry had made when he was marrying Anne Boleyn. So not everything was wiped away, and I don't know if that was maybe that was intentional, maybe it wasn't. But or maybe it was just an oversight. But he did. But getting back to what I was talking about, he did write a lot of letters to her. He wrote poetry, letters, things like that, and a lot of those like from his end survive. But and there are and one thing I think I was watching a Claire Ridgway video, and she said that there is evidence in some of Henry's letters that perhaps Anne was kind of ignoring him, just kind of like not even responding to him. And because there are some parts of his letters where he seems concerned, like why are you not responding to me? Did I offend you? Or, or something like that, But it's really because just like what you hear about Henry VIII, and, and then it's like you listen to some historians read the letters that he wrote to Anne Boleyn. It's just like, and it adds definitely, it makes Henry a lot more, human to me, because we think of this this guy here, this tyrant, who, just kind of like just got off on killing people and everything. And April and I, in last week's episode, we did kind of touch on how, everybody, I mean, historical figures, it's like they were multifaceted people. And I don't quite agree when people try to say that he never once regretted what he did to Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn, particularly. I don't agree with that. Because first of all, I mean, only Henry knows what Henry was thinking. We could speculate, we can look at, things he said, who said what, but at the end of the day, only Henry knows what Henry was thinking. And, who knows, maybe some people that were like the closest to him, but even with even people that were closest to him, I mean, I don't know. Just think about it. I mean, it's like, even your closest friends, it's like, do you tell them every little thought that you're thinking? I would probably say no. I don't think anybody really does that. I think we all, there are, even some of the most, people who are the biggest extroverts out there, you still have, things that you keep for yourself and thoughts that you keep for yourself. So, I don't know. I think to say that, Henry had absolutely no feelings whatsoever is a bit of a stretch. At the end of the day, like I said, he was human, and I'm sure as he was laying on his deathbed, especially since he was at the end of it all, he was a very religious man. I'm sure a lot of the stuff that he's done, and he's afraid for his, probably afraid for his salvation, and, and there are people who, close confidants of his that, did witness, like his death and everything, and say that, he did want to be sure that, God would forgive him of his sins and everything so that he could make it into heaven. I'm sure, even if it was just at the end of his life, the stuff that he did, including what he did to Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn, was probably, I would imagine they were, especially knowing how religious he was, probably, like, oh, okay, like maybe, I don't know, maybe I could have treated them a little bit better or something like that, And when and also another thing too is when you go back a little bit further than Henry and look at his father, Henry VII, and the kind of man Henry VII was, and the kind of ruler Henry VII was, it kind of helps explain Henry VIII a little bit better and why he turned out to be the man that he was. So with that said, I am going to get into some of the books, the many books I'm reading here. So this is like I said, I've been getting into a lot of Claire Ridgway's work, and I do love her work. I love her work. Not only she has a YouTube channel called the Anne Boleyn Files, and she and then she's also a member of like the Tudor Society and all that stuff. But she's done a lot of stuff on Anne Boleyn, but she's also done stuff on the other Tudors as well, and even some people from the Plantagenets. But this is the first book that I got from her. It's the Anne Boleyn collection, and it's the first book, and I think there's 3 books in the Anne Boleyn collection. Now this book, I would say, is definitely it's quite entertaining, and it shows a lot. It kind of brings to light a lot of the myths that are often said about Anne Boleyn, and including, oh, did she have a 6th finger, and did she did she have like was she as plain as some of the as some people describe her as. And what's interesting is that because if you look up how did Anne Boleyn look, like some of the stuff's not very flattering. However, one thing that Claire Ridgway points out is that the people that did write those descriptions were people that number one, weren't even Anne's contemporaries. In fact, at least not most of them. Number two were those that Anne's daughter, Elizabeth I, had sent into exile because Elizabeth was kind of bringing forth the Protestant religion as opposed to her sister Mary, who wanted to keep England Catholic. But Elizabeth was very much into the Reformation and Protestantism and all that stuff. And a lot of people also say that Anne Boleyn was a Protestant. Anne Boleyn, based on what I've been reading and researching, and including Henry, Henry wanted to be the head of the Church of England. He was still very much a Catholic, though. However, what he started was like what would later on fuel the beginning of the Reformation in England, and England's conversion into Anglicanism or like more Protestantism. However, Anne Boleyn was more of like a Reformationist too. However, she wanted to reform the Catholic Church from within. Like there were some things that she didn't quite agree with, but she was quite religious, and she thought, that the Catholic Church, it was good, it was fine, like she didn't really have any issues with it, but there were some things that she thought could use reformed, and and so that's, in a nutshell, there was obviously more to it than that, but in a nutshell, that's kind of how that was. And then those that did not support then later on Elizabeth's foray into Protestantism and Elizabeth sent into exile, those people were the ones that wrote the less than flat, like how she had like a protruding tooth or like a six finger, and and Claire Ridgway makes a great point. Henry was quite paranoid, he was quite superstitious, he was quite religious, and he would not risk, and therefore he wanted his offspring, obviously, he wanted a son, and but whatever offspring he had, he wanted them to be strong because they were going to be his successors to the throne, and he wanted, and just due to all of the paranoia of his father Henry VII and everything that Henry VII went through and everything, and his Henry VII was constantly just drilling into, like it was drilled into a young Henry VIII's head that, you need to have that strong successor, because there's always people looking to overthrow you, and which later on fed into Henry's paranoia, especially, which also kind of led to Anne Boleyn's downfall as well. But Henry was having that drilled into his head from a young age. His father's paranoia drilled into his head from a young age. And, and his father, he had reason to be paranoid. Definitely. But he wanted strong, good offspring, and Claire Ridgway makes that good point. She was like, maybe like a birthmark or something he could handle, but like, but a six finger, no, he would not want to risk that being passed on to, a future king of England or something like that, just because he was very superstitious, very religious, and, so that's a good point that she makes. And aside from the facts that, those that wrote those less than flattering descriptions of Anne Boleyn were those that opposed the endeavors of her and Henry's daughter, so which also kind of, that makes sense, because then you read actual contemporary sources that were around when Anne Boleyn was there and actually saw her. They actually say, yeah, she did not, while she did not look like the typical English rose, and she wasn't the standard of beauty that, of a typical English lady, because, your typical English rose was like very fair-skinned, fair-haired, light eyes, just just light everything, whereas Anne Boleyn, she, according to contemporaries, had darker hair, a darker complexion, dark eyes, and she looked quite different. So, while, yeah, like I said, her contemporaries, they say like she didn't have the look of a typical English rose, she was still nice to look at, and actually, and several people said quite beautiful. And I even discussed with April last week that perhaps, this was what, and even other people agree that, like, other historians agree that perhaps this was what drove Henry to her, was the fact that she was so different. She looked different, she acted different from a lot of, English ladies, because she had spent time in France at the court of, the king and queen of France, and also, Austria and all that. She had spent time out of England, and she, especially in France, she learned the ways of the French, and she learned, like just all of those mannerisms, and, how to present yourself, even how to flirt, So she learned all of those things that a lot of other English women weren't learning, and she also had a sense of style to her that was quite different, because that, sense of style that she, there were some things to how she, little things to how she, about how she dressed that, that kind of showed her, her time spent in France that was very French influenced. She was quite French, quite influenced by the French. So, those things just all together, plus the fact that, she was said to have been very witty and very intelligent, and, it was even said that, like, she and Henry, like, they were a perfect match when it came to, like, matching wits and all that stuff. So, so there were many, many things that drew Henry to Anne, and also, and he was, and some people just say, oh, he only wanted to divorce Catherine of Aragon because, she was getting older, and, therefore her ability to produce children, was dwindling, and, and that could be part of it. That could be very, I'm sure that was part of it, because Catherine of Aragon, the only healthy child that, she was able to actually bring forth. And she did have a couple of sons, but they unfortunately all passed shortly after they were born. But their only healthy child was their daughter Mary, who would later on become Mary the First, and monarch of England. Yeah, so that, I'm sure that was part of it, because Henry did, like I said, he wanted a son, because of, a lot of that had to do with his upbringing and what his father went through. He wanted to make sure he had that secured, that nobody would try, would have an excuse to overthrow him, because he wanted the Tudor lineage to just carry on forever. That ended up not happening, but that's what Henry wanted. And he didn't want anything to threaten that. So, like I said, sure, that was part of it. But, when people say, like, oh, he didn't love Catherine of Aragon, the same thing when people try to say that he didn't love Anne Boleyn. Again, I don't quite agree with that. I think, and I know April and I discussed how when he had his jousting accident, which happened, like, which started to, which kind of introduced his downward slide while he was married to Anne Boleyn, and then he eventually just completely fell apart when James Seymour died, after she gave birth to their son, Edward, and, but I do, here's the thing, he and Catherine of Aragon were said to have been very happily married for a long time, and it wasn't until, like, maybe a few years prior to, to their, eventual annulment that, Henry started to lose interest. So, and then he, you know, of course, started to pursue Anne Boleyn, and he pursued Anne Boleyn for a good long while, you know, I mean, he pursued her for like a few years, several years before he was finally able to marry her. You know, and that's the thing, like, he was the king. He could pretty much have any woman he wanted, and yet he, you know, overturned the Church of England. He, his beloved Catholic Church. He, you know, split with the Pope. He did, you know, he did a lot to be able to have Anne Boleyn. And that's the thing. I don't think it was, oh, he just wanted, you know, like, he just did that because he wanted something. I mean, he could have, I'm sure, and he did have a son, you know, with Bessie Blunt, one of his mistresses. So, you know, why didn't he just, you know, even Claire Ridgway kind of asked this question. Well, you know, if that was the only reason, if that was the sole reason why he was looking to get rid of Catherine of Aragon, you know, then yeah, he could have just made life a lot easier for himself and maybe just married like Bessie Blunt or something like that, because Bessie Blunt already had his son, you know, and he could have, you know, married Bessie Blunt and, you know, made Henry Fitzroy, their son, like a, you know, automatic heir to the throne. You know, life would have been grand and happy, but, you know, but he didn't do that. So, and that's the thing. The stuff that he went through for Anne Boleyn, you don't do that for somebody you just kind of sort of like, or somebody you just kind of view as, you know, like a mistress or something, because he actually did. He offered her a position to be his main mistress, which would act Anne Boleyn, meaning he offered Anne Boleyn the position of his, like, I guess, main mistress. She would be like, you know, it would be like it would be like a paid position. She would be put up in like the finest, very fine apartments. She would basically be given anything she wanted. I mean, it would almost be like she was like a second wife, except it wouldn't have been through marriage or anything like that. But Anne turned that down because she didn't want to be that. But Henry did offer that to her. But Anne turned that down, and but that's the thing, you know, the stuff that he went through for Anne. Like I said, you don't do that for somebody you kind of sort of like or kind of sort of see as like a temporary fling, you know. Like, to me, like, that just wouldn't make any sense, especially when you consider the politics of that day, you know. So Claire Ridgway covers that in this book. I mean, that's all that, you know, this is a very interesting read. I'm currently also reading the Anne Boleyn collection too. And this gets more into the family history and family tree of the Boleyns. And it's really, really fascinating because when you go way back, when you go way back into the Boleyn's family tree, because Anne Boleyn's parents, it was Thomas Boleyn and Elizabeth Howard, and and when you go all the way back, they do actually have royal ancestry, because another myth is that Anne Boleyn was a commoner, and she was not. She was actually, she was part of the, they were part of the aristocracy. They came from the lineage of Edward I. They had royal lineage in them. And there's also really interesting, they do have connections with the Plantagenets, who were overthrown by the Tudors. And let me see, there's Elizabeth Plantagenet, who was a daughter of Edward I, and also the Boleyns, especially even including on Thomas's side, and I do believe on Elizabeth Howard's side, they served in the courts of the Plantagenet the Plantagenets of the House of York. So which is also kind of interesting. When you really kind of look back and you see like all the 6 degrees of separation that everybody has. And then I haven't started reading this yet, but this is a book that Claire Ridgway and Claire Cherry wrote on Anne's brother George, because, you know, we can't leave George on the table. You can't talk about Anne without talking about George, okay? And George was quite a character. I, you know, look forward to reading this, and he was also, I mean, I believe wrongfully executed as well. So I look forward to reading this. I do think it's too bad that, because they did have a sister, Mary, who is also talked about too, and a little bit is known about her, but not enough. And I wish that, you know, because she is said to be quite a shadowy figure, and I don't know, who knows, maybe perhaps she was kind of smart to lay low the way she did. But I do wish that there was more about her, because I'd love to, you know, see a book, like a whole book, you know, like George, like this one on George, written about Mary, because, you know, it's also, and I know, like, they have stuff like The Other Boleyn Girl, which I'm not going to talk about that one. I'm not a fan, but also even, like, you know, other portrayals of their relationship, like, say in the television in the television series The Tudors. You know, some of that is based on some historical record. But others, it's just kind of like, you know, they're filling in the blanks. But I do wish that there was more out there on Mary. Like I said, who knows? Maybe there is, but it just hasn't been discovered yet. And I did mention before Catherine Parr. Now, these are more historical fiction. This is The Queen's Gambit, and this is The Sixth Wife. This is by Susanna Dunn, and this is by Elizabeth Fremantle. And like I said, these are more historical fiction, but I mean, that could still be, you know, that could still be fascinating. You could still learn a little something from it. But what is interesting about Catherine Parr was that Catherine Parr married Jane Seymour, who was Henry's third wife, who was the woman that Henry then threw over for Anne Boleyn. I mean, no, wait. The woman, yeah, Henry threw Anne Boleyn over for. Sorry. Yeah, so Henry threw Anne Boleyn over for Jane Seymour. Okay, and, you know, and then Jane Seymour, she did end up having a son, the son Henry wanted, Edward, and then, you know, she passed away shortly thereafter. But Jane Seymour's brother, Thomas Seymour, now this is interesting. Jane Seymour's brother, Thomas, ended up marrying Catherine Parr. Okay, Catherine Parr, after Henry died, of course, because, you know, she's not going to mess with anybody while Henry's still alive. But Catherine Parr did marry Thomas Seymour. It said that, you know, she did love him. So Henry's last wife married the brother of Henry's third wife. And then she also was, of course, the stepmother to Henry's three other children, Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward. And Catherine and Elizabeth, and keep in mind, Elizabeth is also the daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. And Elizabeth and Catherine Parr actually had a very close, almost like a mother-daughter relationship. It was, and it almost seems like since Elizabeth never got to really know her mother, unfortunately, you know, she found a lot of solace and had a good relationship with Catherine Parr, which, you know, which is nice, you know, and. But then Thomas Seymour was said to have, and, you know, Elizabeth is still a teenager, you know, like a teenager at this time, barely a teenager. Thomas Seymour starts to eye up Elizabeth. And, you know, he starts trying to flirt with Elizabeth, and which, so Thomas Seymour, you know, Jane Seymour's, you know, keeping in mind who Jane Seymour was and who, you know, Henry threw over for her. So Thomas Seymour ends up, you know, trying to flirt with the daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. Well, it ended up getting so bad too that Elizabeth, so that Catherine Parr actually, she was horrified by what was, by it, and she ended up actually sending Elizabeth away to protect her. And I know I've read in several accounts that was actually quite heartbreaking for both of them. But but Catherine Parr, like, she felt like she was like this lioness when it came to Elizabeth, and she really, wanted to protect Elizabeth. And Catherine Parr, passed away tragically, and and she did give birth to a daughter, but that daughter unfortunately did not survive. And then later on, when Edward took the throne, Jane Seymour's and Henry VIII's son then took the throne at only the age of 9. Then his uncle Thomas Seymour was then executed for treason not too long after. So it's just kind of like this whole big kind of Tudor era. It's like, I mean, it really is. It's like, it's like I said, it's really interesting when you look at all the 6 degrees of separation that everybody has with each other, and it's like, and how a lot of things kind of circle back around again. And but it's really really quite fascinating history. Now, going even further back, we have the War of the Roses, which is basically what led up to the rise of the Tudors. Now, up until the Tudors, England was ruled for centuries by the Plantagenets, or the House of York. And that's where a lot of the television shows, like if you've ever heard of The White Queen, The White Princess, that focuses on the Plantagenets and the House of York, like Elizabeth of York, so to speak. And then also leading up to the Battle of Bosworth, where the Tudors did overthrow the Plantagenets, and King Richard III was defeated. And Richard III, I mean, I should just do a whole episode, I think, on the Plantagenets, because there's so much you could say about them, and Henry VII, and again, you start to study all of that, and study how Henry VII came to the throne, and understand his paranoia. And then he passed that on to, and then of course, he had another son, he and Elizabeth, they had another son with called his name was Arthur, and Arthur actually, unfortunately, Arthur was originally married to Catherine of Aragon, but he unfortunately passed away, and then Henry later on married Catherine of Aragon. So that's how that happened. But you really look at the people that like especially Henry VII, and you start to understand Henry VII and how he was, and how it might have been like for Henry VIII to grow up seeing that, and like and some of the things that his father taught him. And also, interestingly too, Richard III he did not get a royal burial until I think like 500 years later after his death. He was actually found in, I think it was 2012, because I was, I think, yeah, that's what the documentary said. It was 2012. He, and I do remember this, I remember this too. He was, his remains were found in under a parking garage, or a car park, I believe it's what they call it over in England. But his remains were found beneath a parking garage. And how they got there was basically, because he was originally after he got a very humiliating death. He was buried inside a monastery, but then when Henry VIII started breaking down England from the Catholic Church, he ransacked all the monasteries, and then at Richard III's remains, because Henry obviously did not like Richard III, didn't think much of him. So Richard III's remains just kind of got tossed. And eventually, hundreds of years later, they ended up at the bottom of a parking garage where they were later on discovered. And that's a fascinating story in itself, how it got discovered. But you look at the footage from 2012 and you see, like, you know, his remains, he's finally getting, you know, getting this royal funeral, this royal burial, you know, hundreds of years later. It's really, really, like, you know, very cool to watch. And Richard III is also, he was said to be a tyrant. And he was also said to, you know, have killed his two nephews. But a lot of, I guess, pro-Plantagenet, you know, I guess you could say they're pro-Plantagenet individuals, they historians, and there's actually also a Richard III Society too, which also they tend to defend Richard III because he did after the rise of the Tudors, he did get dragged through the mud quite a bit. In fact, the Shakespearean play Richard III kind of does that. However, you know, and this was kind of interestingly pointed out too. Of course, Shakespeare, when Shakespeare wrote Richard III, he was writing it for Elizabeth I, so he's not going to write her grandfather Henry VII in an unfavorable way, because you don't do that to the monarch in power. So, because that could, you know, land you in a not so good position with the monarch. So of course, he wrote it to favor the Tudors, wrote it to favor Elizabeth I's grandfather. But Henry VII rewrote a lot of the history. He rewrote a lot of, you know, the Tudor family tree to make it seem like, you know, like they had more royal blood than they really did. Who knows? Maybe Anne Boleyn actually, at the end of the day, had more royal blood in her than Henry VIII did. You know, but it's really fascinating because there was one documentary I was watching, you know, saying who really is the rightful royalty today. Because the real royal blood was overthrown in the Battle of Bosworth at the end of the War of the Roses, when Richard III was overthrown and Henry VII was then crowned king. Like, somewhere there are, you know, I mean, you know, there are direct descendants of the Plantagenets, and the question was begged at the end of this documentary. Should they be, you know, the royal family that we know today? It's you know, when you start to think about that stuff, it's really, it kind of makes you think. It really is just like, oh, you know, what if the Plantagenets had won at the Battle of Bosworth? You know, what if, hey, thanks for joining, all right. You know, what if, you know, the Plantagenets and the House of York actually had won at the Battle of Bosworth, and we wouldn't have had, you know, the Tudors, we wouldn't have had, you know, Henry VIII or, you know, Anne Boleyn or you know, I mean, we might have still had them, but not in the way that we know them today. Or, you know, Elizabeth I. I mean, would Elizabeth I had, you know, would she have even existed, or Mary I, or, you know, I mean, you know, and what might have, you know, become of Henry VIII's wives? Like, maybe had they not, you know, would they have still maybe been to like the Plantagenet court? Because, like I said, Anne Boleyn's family did serve the Plantagenet, you know, those in the Plantagenet court. And they do have connections with the Plantagenets as well. So, you know, so it's really fascinating. Like, when you think about it, like, history of like the royals in England would be completely different than what we know it as today. And I don't know. And you know, that particular documentary, it just really, really got me thinking about that. Like, yeah, what if Richard III had, you know, secured his spot on the throne over Henry VII? And what if Henry VII's army didn't overthrow the Plantagenet and the House of York's army? You know, it's like I said, I mean, I don't know. You know, that might be, I don't know, maybe little what if, historical fiction or something. I don't know. That might be a cool idea. But, even just exploring that area. And I don't know, am I team Plantagenet or team Tudor? I mean, I don't know. That's a tough one because I am quite partial to the Tudors. I do find, Henry VIII a very fascinating character. I do find Elizabeth I and, just the whole story of his wives and everything. I do find that all to be very, very fascinating. And I love just watching documentaries on them and like Henry VIII's court and everything. But I don't know. The more I'm reading, I'm delving into the Plantagenets and the House of York and Richard III and, and all, Elizabeth of York. I mean, all of those people. I don't know. In a way, and in April, actually in last week's episode brought this up too. I mean, in a way, they actually kind of make this guy seem kind of boring almost, and, I don't know if I'd say boring, but I don't know about you, but for me, the further back in history, the more fascinating I find the individuals or just the events and the ways of life, because for me, it's like from about maybe the 19th century on, like say, like the Victorian era, and then, getting into the Edwardian era, and then, World War I, and then going into like, the Roaring 20s, the 1930s, and then World War II. I mean, yes, of course, I find them very fascinating, but for me, they don't seem as foreign to me as the times earlier. I'd say maybe from about the mid 18th century on down. Those areas seem a little bit, I don't know, like they seem a little bit more, I guess, not of this world, I guess you can say to me, whereas the more recent times, like maybe mid 19th century on, seems a little bit more, like I said, a little bit more accessible to me. I don't know. Like, let me know what you think. But that's just kind of how I feel. And especially like when, especially in reading about like the Boleyns and how in their family lineage that goes back to like, 1307 and 1206. It's like I'm just kind of like, just really, really fascinated about, knowing who those people are, those people who lived in like the 1200s. I mean, like, to me, like, that's just like, I don't know, like, that's just really, like, to me, like, that's just more fascinating. Like I said, like, the further back you go, like, the further back toward the fall of Rome, I guess, that you go, like, just to me, like, the more fascinating history I find like the historical figures are. I don't know, but that's just me. So, like I said, I definitely do enjoy the Tudors. I enjoy, just reading about them. I find them very fascinating. But the Plantagenets, I don't know, like they just take family drama, I guess, to a whole new level. But they are very, like I said, that's just such a fascinating time in history, and I do very much appreciate like the women of those times, like especially like Elizabeth of York, and and of course I like reading. I'm finding I'm really enjoying reading a little bit more about Richard III because just because like he has been portrayed throughout the centuries just as this tyrant, which I'm sure in some cases that's true, but kind of like we talk about in all of these. I mean, these people were multifaceted. There were all different sides to them, and and what's important is trying to understand, why they were the way they were, and and who, really, what led them to do the actions that they did. And in understanding that, I think you can much better understand history and why, there were certain belief systems, and, why, certain people were able to come into power, if you will. So, All right, so we're coming up onto the hour. Thank you for joining me again for another Tavern live stream. Cheers. And yes, I will be back on May 7th with Eliza Vince Leitchik and her husband Eric. I'm really excited about that. And of course, this replay, the replay of this will be available after we're done here, and it'll be available first on IGTV as usual, and then I'll be posting it on my other platforms, including my Celtic Nations magazine blog. So yeah, so thank you very much. I actually went over an hour. I can talk about this stuff all night, but I have other stuff I need to do. So once again, thank you for joining us. And if you came in late or, you missed it all together, we will have the replay here for you in just a moment. So, all right, I look forward to the future Tavern live streams. Oh, and check out our Folklore, Fable, and Legends Friday on the Bonfires and Time Travel website. This week we are covering the Cluricaun, who is the slightly more mischievous cousin to the Leprechaun. So, and he likes to haunt, apparently Cluricauns like to haunt taverns and wine cellars. So maybe we'll have a Cluricaun night here on the live stream one of these days. So, all right, thanks very much. And yeah, I'll see you on the next live stream. All right, once again, cheers. And okay, have a lovely weekend.